So if you go back and watch my videos, especially the one about the nurse who started at 22 and ended up having over $7 million of net worth, what would happen in this scenario if things happened a bit differently? Let's say that the nurse started at 32 instead of 22, and let's say they were not patient and prepped and prepared to buy a house, but instead they decided to go out and buy a house immediately after he graduated. Welcome to What Would I Do? This is where I take a very detailed example of someone's situation and try to make the best of it. Feel free to send me your information or your situation, and I can try to play with it and see what the best could be made of it or what I would recommend you do. If you haven't watched The Broke Nurse to Multi-Millionaire, please go back and watch this. But a quick recap, again, this couple started off with just $500 to their name plus their car. From age 22, they followed some of these sound financial advice and then ended up with a fully paid house with over $7 million in their retirement accounts and additional accounts by the age of 60. In this scenario, OP is 32 years old. His wife is 31 years old. They are been married for a couple of years. They already have 2 kids, ages 6 and 2. OP just graduated as an RN, making $80K a year pre-tax. The company will do a 50-cent to dollar match up to 6%. This means that if he puts in 6%, they'll put in 3%. If he puts in any bit more, his company wasn't putting in any more themselves. OP also took additional PRN job that will get them an additional $28,000 a year to help compensate for his wife who was working as a cashier prior. Their total take-home pay post taxes and post this 6% contribution to the 401k is $7,200. As I indicated earlier, they did not save to buy a house. They bought one immediately after he finished his job and graduating as an RN. They wanted the extra space. They had the 2 kids. They wanted what they wanted and they wanted it now. As I noted in the other example, they bought a $450,000 house. That is the same. Also the same as at an 8% interest rate, 3% down, 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Their loan amount would be $436,500 compared to only $150,000 for the 22-year-old. In these examples, I will be referring to the OP, the current guy as the OP, and the other nurse as just the 22-year-old, even though as his steps progress along the line, he is often older because he also bought a house at age 30, which is 2 years prior to this guy, but there's different steps along the way. So if I say the 22-year-old, note he may be older at that time. OP's payment is $3,809.76. This is compared to $1,701. Their monthly house payment takes up 53% of their take-home pay. By the time they pay off this loan at age 62, they would have paid over $716,000 in interest. So their mortgage payment, again, of $3,809.76, plus the $200 for housing repairs a month, plus $80 a month for water and sewage, plus $300 for electricity, $120 for phone, $120 for internet, $25 for trash, food and eating out, $600, plus car insurance is $80 a month. And then they account for about $500 a month for other stuff. This makes their total monthly expenses $5,834.76, leaving their current margin of $1,365.24. Note we have not looked into any of their debts at this time, nor some of their upcoming needs or expenses that are coming up. Their current debts, like in the previous example, it's still $15,000 at 5% with a minimum payment of $120. Credit cards, they still owe $3,000. They still have the same promo for 6 months. They have no interest adding on to this, but after 6 months, it's 30% with a minimum $40 payment. They currently own their car, but suspect they will need to replace it in 3 years or get a second car within the 3-year timetable. Like in the first example, they also just have $500 with no additional savings, no additional retirement, nothing. But again, they were able to put 3% down towards the house. With debts, payments, and their monthly expenses are now $5,994.76 with a monthly take-home of $7,200 leaving a total monthly margin of just $1,205.24. In this example, we're assuming OP and his wife won't do the smart thing, meaning that they won't go out and sell their house and buy a house more within their means, closer to that 25% of their take home. So again, we are trying to do the best we can with the limitations that OP and his wife are putting under us. So like before, they need to figure out their 6-month emergency fund and what that should be, especially now that they're homeowners and they'll have a lot more expenses with their house. Now the 22-year-old OP, their monthly expenses were just $2,500 a month to start off. Now they're just shy of $6,000. So we have to multiply $6,000 by 6, which is a good old 36, if you remember those good old math times tables, but add 3 extra zeros at the end of that. So their emergency fund should be $36,000. Like before, they need to set this money aside in a separate high yield savings account so they don't have the temptation to see it or use it. They should also keep additional $6,000 in their normal bank account as a buffer to help them. So as they come to the end of the month, they have $6,000 in there to at least be able to cover the next month's expenses. This means that with their $500 already on hand, that they only now need $41,500. Their current monthly margin went from $4,700 in the first scenario to a much less astounding $1,205.24. In our 22-year-old's example, he had his fully funded emergency fund within 3.6 months. Now it will take an astounding 34.4 months to get a fully funded emergency fund. This is almost 3 full years. And in doing this plan, we can't forget that there are $3,000 in credit card debt, that the promotion's ending within 6 months. So this alone would take another 2.5 months to fully pay off if they prioritized it before the interest went berserk on it. So let's say that the first 3 months they added the margin to the emergency fund to get a little bit more of a buffer than $500, and then the next 3 months they paid off the credit cards in full, and then the following 31.4 months they continued to make a fully funded emergency fund. OP is already 3 years deep into this plan and has only managed to pay off his credit card debt and have an emergency fund. Still big for the family, but again, nowhere near where we were before. They haven't been able to save for a car at all to this point, and they aren't saving near enough for retirement if they want to have a half decent retirement. He's 35 and has very minimal to show for it, and they still owe a lot on their student loans. Now that they've paid off their student loans, their monthly margin is now $1,245.24. Normally, someone who's made these decisions would go off and buy the car anyway. Let's say they're able to display a little bit of self-restraint and are able to nurse the car for an extra 3 years. As they've just paid the minimum payment on the student loans for the last 3 years, he still owes $12,752 on the original $15,000 loan. OP and his wife decide to put half of it in a high yield savings account per month to save towards the car. That's $622.62. And the other half they're putting towards their student loan. It would take 22 months to pay off his student loans. After the increased payment, they are now 5 years in at age 37 and 36 respectively, and they only owe on their mortgage, and they've started to save for the car. We are seriously lacking in many areas though. With only 1 more year before they really need to get the newer car, they are still putting the $622.62 per month in the high yield savings account. But with that remaining $622.62 that they were putting towards their student loans, they're now putting into 2 separate Roth IRA accounts, one for the husband, one for the wife. Even though they won't get near the limits at this time, still something's better than nothing, and they are already 37 years old, so they kind of really need to start. At year 6, they're in dire need of that new car. They have managed to save $622.62 per month for the last 3 years at 4%, which would roughly put them at $22,000 saved. They decided that they would stick to the same new Toyota Camry MSRP of $24,000 that we showed in the first example. When all is said and done, it cost them $27,500 at 5%. So their loan amount is just $5,500 at 5% for 3 years. Again, sticking to the Money Guys 23 and 8 rule. Their monthly payment is $164.84 for 3 years. They decide that on top of that, they will continue to add $200 a month into their savings account for the new car fund or car repairs. Once the car is paid off, they'll continue to contribute the $364.84 a month into this account until pretty much until the end of time. They will continue to add $364.84 into this account until it is deemed that they no longer need to, which will probably be by retirement. Their new monthly costs with the car are now $6,199.60, with an additional $622.62 going into their Roth IRAs. This only leaves $377.78. The 10% Wealthy Barber Fund, sadly, without going into cheaper housing situation or getting an additional job, continues to seem very out of reach for them. I highly recommend prioritizing your life that you can add that 10% Wealthy Barber Fund. However, with their margins and with the household debt and household payment being more than 50% of their take-home pay, it makes that extremely difficult. They decide at year 6 to up their Roth IRA contribution and add that additional $377.78 to that, so that makes it their contribution be $1,000.40 per month. Without the increased margin, they were unable to save for college fund. Their children had to either get the scholarships if they wanted to go to school debt-free or take out loans themselves. Remember, the 22-year-old OP and his wife were able to save almost $200,000 for their kids for college compared to this OP. So please go back and listen to the other one, see how they were able to make it happen. But just a few different life choices can make things extremely different for you. So you need to take that into account when you are making a decision for satisfaction in the present versus what it may be costing you in the long haul. Assuming they didn't put anything more towards retirement, no additional raises, no additional jobs, wife never went back to work, etc. What will this 401k be by the time he turns 60? What will his Roth IRAs be? And let's again, as in the other example, assume just an 8% yearly return. And don't forget, even at age 60, since he bought the house at age 32, he will still owe 2 years on the house. For his 401k, he's added 6% of his pay for the last 28 years. This is $4,800 per year, plus his employer's match, which brings that contribution up to $7,200 a year. By age 60, OP and his wife should have about $800,663 saved. This is compared to the $1,850,231 that the 22-year-old OP had, where the only difference in this was starting 10 years earlier for the 22-year-old. So it's a decade less of contributions and a decade less for it to compound for you. It cost him another $1 million just in this account. For the Roth IRA, starting it by the 5th year of this plan and contributing slightly more starting the 6th year, but never reaching the full contribution limits, and starting many years after the original OP. By age 60, he and his wife should have $823,905 total in these accounts, compared to the $3,209,945 that was in the original OP's Roth IRA accounts. So this cost them, again, waiting an additional 10 years to start working and get going, $2,386,040 in lost money there. Their home will be paid off in an additional 2 years. They are technically still millionaires with $1,624,568 in their retirement accounts, plus a lot of the equity within their home. But compared to the original OP that had over $7 million in assets, plus being able to pay for his children's education, plus a fully paid off home, it really doesn't compare situationally. Now, I'm not trying to be like a Debbie Downer here and be, well, if you ain't a young kid, you kind of suck. In the book, The Wealthy Barber, the barber, when he's teaching some of his clients how to better use money, he uses the example that, yes, if you want a big nice tree in your backyard, it was best to plant it 30 years ago, but the next best time is to plant it today. So if I were to do this example again, which I won't, I'll be changing it up. And hopefully you guys will be sending me some of your examples and situations there. That makes it a lot more personable. But if I were to start OP at, let's say, 38 or 42, an additional 10 years after this, the prospective gains and improvements that he can make would put him in a lot better situation than what he currently is today. But comparatively to making these good, consistent, healthy decisions decades earlier, of course you're going to do a lot better. The compounding growth doesn't really compare well at all. So comparatively to most people today, him starting at age 32 with all the things that we've just expressed here, he'll still be better off than a vast majority of the population. Hopefully not better than you guys, especially if you're making the right decisions now. But again, if you want me to run through your numbers, leave me as many details as you're willing to offer. The more details you leave, the better it helps me get a better picture. Found this at all any entertaining to listen to, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. Again, I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers by the end of the year. Till the next example, ciao.